a practical. Okay, I got this. Yeah. So yeah, it would be difficult for me to provide you practical information in how to measure social change and research methodology, because that's not my field of work. So it is really a pity that Diana couldn't be here. She would give us an overview of the research methodology, and I really can't do that because I'm far from being an expert in the matter. Still, I think it is important that we make a general distinction before we move forward to my presentation. So, and that's what I will do now, briefly. Scientific methodology is divided in two distinct approaches: quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative approach seeks numbers, statistics, ratios, probabilities. It is done by systematic observation, rigorous experimentation, rigid surveys. The qualitative approach seeks opinions, biographies, histories, practices. It is done by semi-structured observation, sometimes participant observation, interviews, group discussions, grounded theory. There's a lot to know about research methodology, but well, I'm not one that will give you this knowledge. Sorry for that. Still, it is important that you keep in your mind this division, these differences between quantitative and qualitative, because I will refer to that. So instead of going too much into the methodology, I'll try to make a more philosophical approach regarding our topic. I'll try a non-academic approach to an academic problem. So let's see how it goes. I wanted to share my screen. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can we do something on that end? Okay, now I'm being able to do it. Yeah, it is okay. No, and now it is disabled. Okay, now it's enabled. And now I'm sharing, and you should be seeing it now, right? Yeah? It's okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So first, I'm going to introduce and problematize the departing question for this session. Can social change be measured? I shall make a non-academic introduction of the concepts of epistemology and hegemony. Second, they will be useful in my intervention. And secondly, I will mainly problematize the quantitative approach in measuring social change. And finally, I will draw some concluding provocations for the discussion. We shall have a very good amount of time for that, since I'm your only speaker today. So I suggest that you take your notes, you record your comments, and we will certainly address them in the discussion. Off we go then. So the main question that was proposed for this session was, can social change be measured? And to answer to that question, we might need to answer other questions, such as what kind of social change are we referring to? For example, are we looking to the kind of social change that our democratic systems propose, such as green economy, a global order, sustainable development, human rights, sustainable development goals, and so on and so forth? Or are we looking to the kind of social change that changes our democratic systems, such as the end of patriarchy, the end of poverty, the end of racism, and so on and so forth. So, when we ask if social change can be measured, we first need to ask what is social change after all? I pose these questions because in the times we live, it gets difficult to distinguish transformation from reproduction. Look at the current events shaking the global democratic order. Russia invaded Ukraine, and Western countries have increased their budgets on defense. One might say that this is quickly becoming an historical social change, but in the other hand, is it about a social change or a reproduction of history? Did the Cold War ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989? Did the Western concerns about the menace of the East ever ceased? So whatever we call social change depends of our lenses over reality. Uh, Ultimately, there is not an universal way of looking to reality because every look to reality depends at least of who is looking to it. And that is the reason why epistemology is so important within and beyond research. Uh, Sorry, that's the slide. Epistemology tells us about the limitations of knowledge. As Plato puts it, we might be prisoners in a cave, uh, entertained with the shadows projected in the wall in front of us. Our knowledge of reality is always limited because we are limited in grasping knowledge. Whatever we do, we will always be inside a cave. Well, partly this is because of our individual limitations, yes, but reality itself limits us in fully understanding reality. Oh, and how can that be? How can reality limit us in understanding reality? While it is certain that knowledge forms reality, it is also certain that reality forms knowledge. Let me try an example. Science produces knowledge about COVID vaccination. So, reality in Europe is nowadays that most Western people are vaccinated against COVID. But would we be vaccinated if there was not a naturalization of inequality in our reality? How far do we have knowledge of the population in the world that never had a vaccine? For example, in Burundi, Haiti, Yemen, or Congo, almost no one took any vaccine. Are we aware of that? And even if we are aware of that, in which way it changes our behavior? Are we not taking vaccines because it creates inequality in the world? So in this case, the reality naturalizes inequality. Uh, The reality that naturalizes inequality affects the knowledge we have of our role in naturalizing inequality. In other words, we are not creating equality in the world because of what we potentially don't know about inequality. And we certainly know a lot, but because of how reality induces us to shape that knowledge. So, yes, reality also influences the way that we perceive and understand reality. And we might be tempted to assume that reality does not affect our good judgment about the knowledge that we gain. But if we do so, we are ignoring all the hegemonies that we are objects of and subjects in. We shall not forget that we don't live by the vision of the world we have. We live under the vision of the world that was hegemonically prescribed for us. It was prescribed for us. So, coming back to the question of what is social change, when we say that there are things that can't change in society. We are very aware of the challenges we face when we try to break hegemonies. But still, epistemologically, tricky word, it remains fundamental to be aware if by social change we mean changing the things that cannot change or the things that can be changed. In other words, it remains important to understand how radical is the social change we conceptualize as a possibility. And I hope that I was clear so far. Having this said, let's come back to the initial question. Can social change be measured? So we know that the concept of social change can be problematic, given the different views and the different radicality it may have. We, we sometimes call social transformation to something that can be also understood as social reproduction. But we need to be able to analyze the world nevertheless. We need to understand that social phenomena around us so that we can find solutions for them. And we also need to analyze if those solutions were productive or not. And that's why we talk about measuring social change. So now I will try to share some critical thinking about the quantitative approach. I'm sure you already did some of that as well. So quantitative methods. I think I'm missing a slide here. Just let me check something. Okay. I'm missing a slide here, no problem. Quantitative methods explore the idea of unlimited rationality. We assume that theoretically, there is no limitation for knowledge when applying rational tools, or even if we find limitations, quantitative methods are perceived as the most scientific approach. This view is not by chance. It is inherited from the historical formation of science. The kind of issues explored by the oldest form of science were not social. They were mathematical, physical, chemical, biological, astronomical, botanical. Social sciences do exist since only 200 years ago. So even today, they live in the shadow of this quantitative paradigm. Still, I think it's easy to show how the rationality of this paradigm fails in social sciences. Let's look at political polls, for example, the polls that we see in the news. They are trying to predict electoral results. They are often fully based in quantitative methods, structured and rigid surveys. And even if they assume that there is a margin of error, sometimes the electoral results are very far from what the polls have said. So the rationality of statistics fail in portraying accurately a social science problem. Another feature from the quantitative methods is to pursue an universal truth. Again, this is inherited from our history. In this case, I would risk to say that Western history has lived under this universalist approach since perhaps 500 years ago. Western colonialism was and keeps being justified because Westerners were bringing the developments from a more advanced civilization to the primitive, underdeveloped territories as if the Western truth was an universal truth. In its arrogance, the Westerner justified colonialism by assuming that the Western development was desired by everyone in the world, but the others were just late. as if there was only one possibility of development, as if the truth of a Westerner was the universal truth. Well, since not much has changed on that regard since 5 centuries, it is only natural that we find social sciences also under the shadow of this universal truth. We might need more centuries to come to the common understanding that what is true in one context is not true in another. And again, this represents a problem for the quantitative approaches. Quantitative methodology has formed a myth, the myth of neutrality. It says that the researcher shall never affect the reality that he or she is studying, being that a bad practice in the scientific method. So influencing the reality that I'm studying is considered a bad practice. Well, how can a researcher not affect the reality that he or she is studying if the very simple research approach is affected by the researcher? How can a researcher be neutral if his or her own epistemology is determinant in the knowledge that is being produced? Regarding neutrality, let me a bit academic here. I'm calling Paulo Freire, a brilliant Brazilian educator that probably you know, and perhaps the most important philosopher of education of the last century. He tries to show how neutrality in education and in politics is a myth. He says that education practices are essentially political and never neutral. It is impossible to be in the world with others and maintain a posture of neutrality. Either one wants or refuses the idea of changing. Avoiding this choice might be comfortable, but perhaps hypocritical, as it corresponds to washing one's hands in the face of oppression. Either strategically or ingenuously, the posture of neutrality in education leads to the reproduction of the dominant ideology, hardly interrogating it. Engaged in the pretense of the neutrality of education, educators, even when embracing the cause of liberation, are often unaware of its dehumanizing power. And paradoxically, they use the same instrument of alienation in what they consider an effort to liberate. So those ideas were taken from a couple of books from Paulo Freire. So neutrality is very convenient when we seek reproduction. It is convenient because, well, hegemonically, the world is displayed and operates in function of the hegemony. But it is also very inconvenient when we seek transformation because it disrupts. Again, it remains fundamental to understand that the radicality of the social change that we assume as a possibility. Of course, Freire was a radical thinker and a radical educator, and not many people can say that. He believed in the radical transformation of reality and therefore the interruption of the hegemonic status quo, the disruption of those things that cannot be changed. So, there is no such thing as neutrality in understanding reality. The more we know about our epistemological standpoint, the more we know about our limitations in understanding reality. If we barely understand our epistemology, as many quantitative research does, we might wrongly presume that our findings are true. So this Cartesian view of science reaches many practices of society. Look at education. Would every education quit numbers, even if we know that they are wrong and produce social inequality? And this is the problematization that I make about quantitative approaches. So now I will address qualitative approaches. Qualitative approaches put us in situation. They bring us to the center of the phenomena we are studying. We meet people and we know their views. We are directly confronted with our wrong assumptions. We feel the symbolic level of reality, the things that don't pop up in surveys and statistics. So in a way, in some cases, while quantitative methodologies seek to produce knowledge for the big picture, qualitative methodologies need to question the big picture in order to produce a more contextualized knowledge. For example, until recently, social sciences were studying racism regardless of other forms of discrimination. But now we know that the phenomena of intersectionality needs a dedicated study. The phenomena of discrimination of an hetero black man is not the same as the phenomena of discrimination of a transgender black woman. We know this due to testimonials, interviews, focus groups, and other qualitative methodology. But qualitative also has limitations. Let's say, for example, that I want to study a human rights and democratic citizenship education program promoted by a municipality, as I'm actually studying for my PhD thesis. Sorry for that. It would be important to talk with the decision makers involved in the program, right? But sometimes they don't have a time to talk about their programs. Sometimes they don't even want to talk about their own programs. And that is a limitation. Many more do exist. We have to cope and live with them. I want to conclude by coming back to the problem of epistemology. So, if we are somehow trapped in a cave, as Plato puts it, and our knowledge is limited, how can we get out of the cave? My first and only suggestion in this session will be for us to radically think about the words and concepts we use every day. What kind of social change are we saying we do as educators? Is it a radical transformation of reality? Or is it the reproduction of the line of development that was hegemonically prescribed for us? Measuring. Is it possible to measure everything? And if not, what happens to the knowledge about the unmeasurable things when we keep measuring social change? Impact. Who is defining the indicators for measuring social impact? Could the propagation of anti-capitalism be considered as a positive social impact? Human rights education. Are human rights transforming society towards full human dignity? Or are human rights reproducing a society where capital is needed to access human dignity? In which way are educators engaging in that reproduction? Competences. Who is defining which competences shall humans have? What happens to the individual aspirations of a learner when all his or her competences are prescribed? What happens to a world where the job of educators is training on prescribed competences? Yeah, well, that was all I had to say. I leave you with the last provoking slide. Thank you very much for the time you gave me. I hope this was useful for you, and I'm looking forward for the discussion ahead. We'll have plenty of time for that. Thank you.
Sergio, thank you very much. I think there was a lot of very profound inspirations or statements that you made. But before I put my thinking on it, let's have questions of clarifications or whatever thoughts that come. The floor is open. Without presentation.
Sorry, I just want to say that I don't hear so well when the voice comes far from the mic. So I don't know how to solve it, but
yeah. So can you hear me better now? Okay, so I think the 1 meter distance is maybe what we go for. I'm going to repeat. Thank you for your statement. I think there is a lot of very profound things that you said. Also provoking, I think, and it already inspires a lot of thoughts in my mind. But Dimitri already had a question. Sabrina, go ahead. And maybe when you ask a question, we do the same thing as in Amala.
Hello.
Hello.
Can we have the presentation? I kind of want to read it again.
Hey, yes.
It was too much thoughts when you're explaining it, so I would like to have more time to read it again, if it's possible.
I will send it. Yes.
Thank you.
It's sure. €5 per person if you want to have.
With or without taxes.
Thank you.
Hi, Sergio. Nice
Hello.
to see you again.
How are you?
I don't know if you remember, we had a talk in Amarante, which was very,
I do remember. Yes.
very enlightening. And I think the differ between if we are transforming or reproducing is really something I think is very present here too. That's great that you brought it up. My question to you is: you understand yourself as a researcher, or more like as a sociologist?
Well, they say that in order to be a sociologist, you need to be a researcher. So yeah, formally, I'm a researcher, but in practice, what I feel that I do is sociology of education. This would be how I would describe me. But of course, in order to create knowledge about something, you need to research, and that's inescapable. You need to do it. Yes.
And that's now is my follow-up question. You do quantitative research, aren't you?
I do qualitative.
You do.
Yes, I don't do quantitative.
Okay.
At the moment.
Yeah, at the moment. I also had a bit the feeling that this is a lot closer to what we could actually afford, no? I have the feeling that if you want to measure social change quantitatively, I mean also qualitatively, that you need kind of big institutions or bigger players who can actually give that effort to give the big picture. And my question would be, who are these actors then, no? And is that not already part of a system which is reproducing? I mean, maybe you also raise this question.
Okay, so in order to answer to your question, let me give a bit more of background from my side. I'm a researcher in the pool of European youth researchers. So this is basically one pool of researchers that come from all over Europe, and they study youth work issues. Some time ago, I was trying to find out some work coming from qualitative methodology. And there is a lot of production, scientific production by Payer. And it is not so easy to find. So my feeling is that tendentiously in the youth field in Europe, we are moving towards, or we are practicing more a quantitative dimension of research. One can say that yeah, because quantitative methods allow us to have the big picture, and they give us numbers. You can say that there are, I don't know, 30% unemployed young people in Europe, or you can say stuff like that. So we have a problem. And curiously enough, normally the solution doesn't solve that problem. The solution only is useful for the institutions that promote the solution, because the institutions can say that they are doing something about the problem, but it's not necessarily the solution to the problem. But that's another question. Your question would be if qualitative methods would be more approachable by people that are in the field, as I suppose you are. I would say yes. I would say yes. You have a privileged position to reach out the groups that you are studying. You know young people. You follow young people. You sometimes exercise the role of educator of these young people. So you know deeply. And in my position, probably not all researchers will say that, but in my position, I would say that this is an advantage, because I don't really believe in neutrality. I believe that it is always an advantage that when you know the people you are talking to, the people that you are studying to. We just need to be aware of our limitations, our own limitations, or what is called positionality. Okay, if you are aware of your positionality, it becomes safe to do, the scientific method and produce knowledge through qualitative research. So you can interview. Some time ago, I was interviewing 3 young people that I know regarding, this post-COVID recovery agenda that is in the European policy table, and I really enjoy doing that interviews. And I was knowing these people previously. It was an advantage. So I think this is something that I think you're right. Something that can be done easier if you are closer to the field. You can also do quantitative on that if you need it for somehow. You can also do. I just feel that I had a teacher about methodology. She was giving a seminar about methodology, and she always said about quantitative methodology that whenever there is a survey, probably there is something wrong. So I go a bit along that, but I'm not saying that it is impossible to do surveys, to be accurate when doing surveys. It always depends of the context, of the ways that you come out with your tools. And yeah, as long as you know what you are doing, you will be more and more accurate in what you're trying to find out. Yeah. I think I answered to your question.
Yeah, you answered my question. I think it's exactly what I thought, that neutrality is really not existing, and that if you're aware of your position, I like your term, positionality, I think you said, really great. And I also have the feeling we have that opportunity and chance to be closer to, we work with young people or youth workers or whoever, and can take advantage of this relation, and really get something more contextualized out of it. And then maybe plus quantitative or whatever. So yeah. Thanks. I have another one, but I would give the floor to Luke.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. I've been meaning to ask about what you said about neutrality. In terms of education, yes, you cannot be neutral, because at some point in your life you go to school, your parents teach you something. But in the political term, isn't there a chance that you can't be neutral? I don't care about politics. I don't support them. I don't care. How can you not be neutral? There are people that don't care. They do not force themselves into politics. That's what I'm asking. Like you said, you don't believe in neutrality, but there can be neutral people in that term.
What is your name?
Chris. I'm sorry. I'm Chris.
Chris. Hello, Chris. Thank you for your very interesting question. I think that your question is about neutrality, but it is also about hegemony. So I'm coming back to what Paulo Freire says. He says that it is impossible to be neutral, because even when you claim that you are neutral, you are assuming that you are playing the game of the hegemony. So that's the way that hegemony works. It's a power so strong that it drives people to a certain place. It drives people to a certain line. We right now, liberal democracies call it development. We are calling development for many years, okay? We are following a line that is built by a certain world order that drives us. We don't question, for example, the model of job, the model of work. We don't question the model of education. We might question that. We might reflect on that, but we don't change it. We cannot change it. It's too strong. We still need money to access our rights. We still need to be educated to access money. And all this is interrelated. So when we say that we are neutral, we are not really neutral. We are playing the game. And the game is defined by an hegemonic order. So I think this is a principle that from that we can think about how neutral we are not. For me, in education, neutrality, educators have a responsibility to understand also their position, because they also have a positionality as educators, not only the researchers that have a positionality. Educators are convinced and trained that it is possible to establish neutrality in education. Like, it doesn't matter what you think, you still need to work in order to facilitate the development of certain competences, independently of what you think. Because if you don't do that, you are unprofessional, okay? This is what we are convinced. This is our mindset. But we need to understand that this mindset is established by an hegemony. And of course, hegemony does, what the hegemony does is that in a way, the educators don't disrupt that hegemony. So it's convenient for the hegemony to convince the educators that neutrality is something possible. Because whenever there is a neutrality, there is hegemony. And whenever there is hegemony, the world is going towards the line of development, towards the line of order that is supposed, okay? Now, the educators are, I would say, responsible to understand their position in there. It's a very delicate position. In one hand, they have to show that they are neutral, because they are not employed if they are not neutral, okay? They have to dress the shirt, as we say in Portuguese. They have to dress the, you know, like the football players. They dress the shirt, and it doesn't matter. Well, nowadays, if you're going to talk about sports, the transfer market is like that. It doesn't matter to who you play for. What matters is the money that you get, kind of. So this is also the way that hegemony plays. Money is the mixer, you know, it's the salt that is coming in all ways. So educators have the responsibility to think about their position, but they have a fragile position, because they not only face the risks of being perceived as radical, for example, but they also, and they face institutional risks. I'm talking about myself, for example. I know that I'm excluded from certain applications for training courses. I'm more excluded now than I was being excluded 5 years ago. And this is not by chance. I'm more experienced educator. I know more, but I also assume that I assume myself as an educator that follows radicality. And this is not necessarily good for the institutions. Okay. And when by institutions, I'm telling you about the Council of Europe, European Commission, United Nations. The institutions are not looking forward to hire radical educators. Okay. This is one thing that I can assure you. The second thing is the risks that you face within your peer network. Okay. Because if you are assuming yourself as a radical educator, what is going to happen is that your colleagues will start looking aside to you. Who is this guy? Huh? Who is this person that feels him or herself as different? And what kind of disruption is this guy taking to the youth work field? Well, this is something strange. A guy that comes to a meeting in a training about democracy and brings the question, oh, but I think we should question democracy. What? Questioning democracy? No, we are training on democracy. We don't need to question that. You understand my point? So there are several risks that you come through when you try to disrupt the hegemonically placed order. Okay. And I hope that I'm being able to clarify your question about neutrality. Politics, I think it's pretty much the same. Education is political. Everything we do is political. That's my view. When we say that we don't, we are not political, we don't care about politics, many things. This can mean many things. But one of the possible meanings is that just we are playing the game. And playing the game, there is no more political position than playing the game in an alienated way. Because
that's what I want to say. I alienate political because I don't care. I don't know enough stuff. On the one hand, I don't know many stuff about political games. On the other hand, I don't want to put myself into the political games. So how am I playing the political game? Because I'm alienated. It's a bit like a paradox. On the one hand, I don't want, but I am in the game just for existing in this world. On the other hand, I play the game. I am political. There has to be something in between. Neutrality. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be the guy who's into politics.
Maybe I can put a sentence in here. I think Václavic is the one who said there is no non-communication. Okay. So I think we don't have the choice to not be political.
Political in what way?
When you say you stay absent from getting involved in politics,
yes.
What do you mean? Like you don't vote? Okay, fair enough. Wait, let me just finish that. But political life happens in every human interaction. So I'm going to say you're political to me by saying opinions that you have. Okay. I think elections or being involved in a party or a referendum are just like a micro, I'm going to say even less important element of democracy or of participation or of being political. The work you chose is highly political. So by your choice, the profession that you took or the task, namely supporting migrants to learn Greek, is very political. Okay. So I'm going to say it's not possible to not be political.
So isn't it a little bit unfair not want to be political, but being political just for existing, apparently? Okay.
Yes.
that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an unfair world. Thank you for that question. Huh? Brilliant question. Thank you very much.
So,
I'm not sure I have here a comment or question, but I think it's more feelings. Hi.
Hello, Surai.
Yes. So when I heard this the last time and this time as well, it brings up a lot of emotions, especially I come from Egypt. And of course, it brings a lot of, what is it called, grievances because of the definitely oppression that we are experiencing. And I think it's related to definitely to the Western world and all of the, political arrangement of. So it's very interesting when I hear, someone from the Western world still speaking about, this radical ideas, right, of resistance. And also there's a lot of this in your words, right? I feel you are an activist. And what I was sharing yesterday, that I feel that there is so many development workers, including myself, have become more of like technicals, right? Bureaucrats. We know all the forms, all the templates, and we are in the job, right? And we get paid. And so sometimes I wonder whether we are not really being radical because of, I think exactly about what you said. We don't want to lose the privilege we have. And I wonder if, do we have to lose privilege in order to make change and to make radical change? And also the second question maybe is, do you really think that this is happening? Do you see many radical educators emerging in the Western world? I know there isn't so many in my world. And whether you have practical ideas of how can we make this happen? Is it like a movement? Is it like, quitting our jobs and joining, I don't know, like a revolution? Can it happen from the system? Yeah. Thank you.
Sabah al khair, Soraya. Thank you very much for your question or your feelings. How can I start by answering you? Let me start by, you asked, you mentioned that educators are more like technical officers. They now have to fill these reports. They have to tell everything they say. They do in, for example, this activity we are in needs to be fully and duly reported to the European Union. Of course, there is a duty on that. Of course, we can see that we need to know how public money is being spent. Yes, but I think that many times that is only the single and poor justification for the workload that is put in the shoulders of educators. Okay, I really think that, as you say, this workload of this paperwork that is put in the shoulders of educators is taking time for the educators to think. And many times, I'm not saying this is the case, but many times, many activities are just photocopies of each other. And that's the reason for why, because educators need to fill the report. It will be easier if they just copy paste the report for another project. Okay. I worked with educators that simply, and they still there. They are still there. They are working a lot. Well, 10 years ago, they were telling me, okay, I have one single session outline for every activity. And this single outline says big group, small group, big group. That's what I do as an educator. And believe me, this was kind of working for them, at least, and it's still working for them. Okay, they have reputation, and they work with institutions and so on. So why does that happen? I think there is a part of the educators that just quit because of this bureaucracy. With bureaucracy, we kill the human side of education. That's what we do, because we put the rational side in. And of course, if we only do that, if we focus, or the center of education is the rationality of the process, that is a dehumanization of the process. okay? But the problem is bureaucracy is necessary, but it's more than necessary, it's naturalized. There will be never an excess of bureaucracy. And because there will be never an excess of bureaucracy, there is more and more and more bureaucracy. There is more and infinite rationality. There is a potential for infinite rationality in the education. So we are ceasing to be human educators in that regard. So Soraya, I really agree with you when you with your concerns about this. But I wanted to tell you three things. One thing, why this doesn't change. We in social sciences call it establishment. Okay, establishment is basically a group of people, a professional class, a social group that will never abdicate their privileges, even if that means to infinitely create an equality, even if it is an equality with their peers, with their own peers, okay? So there is an educators establishment in Europe. It is very, very clear because if you go to European activities, you always see the same people facilitating the processes or being the experts there. They are very convenient because they work for institutions. They don't disrupt the progress that institutions envisage. They don't do this. They don't question institutions. And they always say the same thing, which is something that is trustable for the institutions. Okay, so establishment. There is an establishment on that. Now, your last question, or you have two last questions about privilege. Do we need to abdicate of our privileges in order to be radical educators? I would say in principle, so yes. Because a radical educator, for me, is someone that can abdicate, can identify, recognize the privileges that he or she has. And by definition, a privileged situation creates inequality. And a radical educator seeks radical equality. So I think that's why we need to abdicate privilege. It's not so hard to abdicate privileges, huh? Because you have the other side. You feel coherent. You feel good with yourself. And that's a very, very rewarding thing to do. We underestimate the feelings that we get when we feel good about ourselves and about the transformation that we do and the impact, the radical impact that transformation also has in us. So if I see many radical educators, the answer is no. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Sergio.
Yeah.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes. Hello.
So thank you for your presentation. It's very inspiring. And I think it has given me and probably most of us a lot to think. My question is, how do you, or what tools do you recommend or do you know for starting to question, like, how do we get out of this own cave in which we are in our minds? Because I think it's really hard to identify our caves, and if we don't see our caves, then how can we help others from theirs? Like, what tools do you use yourself to question your own assumptions, your own reality? maybe you can share with us how you do it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. I'm not sure if I will be able to answer in a way that will be useful to you, but what I can do is to tell you about the tools that I use and did work for me. The first tool, let's call it, was to get time. I was not having time in my life. I was totally focused on work, and work was always very intensive for me, and it was intensive for 15 years, something like that. And I was fed up with that. And I felt that I needed time to think, just that, time to think. So I stopped. I stopped my work. I dedicated myself to another occupation, which is studying, which allowed me to have time to think. It might be difficult. For me, it's perhaps more difficult than if I had a scholarship, because from time to time I have to work, and that also occupies me and interrupts my line of thought or line of writing. But still, it is, I would say, something to consider. Get time. Secondly, I read, but I didn't read the books that were being advised to me in Erasmus Plus projects. Okay, I didn't read those books. I read other books. Very simple, and I think straightforward recommendation will be Paulo Freire. I already talked about Paulo Freire in this session. So I would say that every educator that has a radical radical expectation about him or herself, every educator that has this, I would recommend Paulo Freire. There is a book that is very known, was one of the most read books in the research community, and it's called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Okay, very known book. Some people find it hard to read, but I would say that if you are an educator and if you see yourself with a radical aspiration, that was the word that I was seeking, I would go with, I'll start with him, Paulo Freire, and take your time reading that book, and give you, if you need 2 hours to read that page, take the 2 hours to read that page. I would go with that. If you are looking for a more updated account of radical education, and perhaps a very interesting one in terms of representation, there was a Black woman that called herself Bell Hooks. Perhaps you heard about her. Bell Hooks is she was a teacher, and she was known for being an excellent teacher, and she was claiming herself as a radical educator. She writes about education. I don't know where I have her books, but I have some. Maybe I will find out. And she has at least 2 or 3 books. I mean, I can pick just the one that you find for a cheaper price, for example, and I would really suggest her as a reading for a radical education aspiration. Of course, if you really want to think about the sociological aspect, you have to go beyond the education discipline. Okay, I think it's useful to understand what are, for example, post-colonial studies. Okay, Soraya was curious about a Westerner that was having a critical standpoint regarding the West, and I think post-colonial studies are perhaps an entry point if you want to have a radical thinking sorry, a post-colonial thinking that can lead you to radical thinking. So my tools were books, but of course, these can vary from person to person. Answer and finalizing, concluding my answer, I think one can perceive, get a better understanding of the cave where he or she is by reading. But you need to be careful in what you read, because if you're reading the books that are, you know, hard coding what is the hegemonic development plan, the sustainable development goals, and so on, if you are reading that, you are not understanding in which cave you are. You are just being there. You are in the cave. You're not attempting to get out. You are putting yourself more and more in. That's a choice. Okay, that's a choice.
Hey again, good to see you. Maybe you remember.
Hello. Oh.
First of all, I have to say I'm completely in love with what you just said. Now, obviously, I want to marry it to psychoanalysis and see what great baby we can make out of it. I hope that is okay for you. So I also got a small list to follow up my train of thought, and I would like to end with a question to you that I think has been quite important. But really, again, really good to hear you again, and I'd like to hear what you said.
Nice to see you. Yeah.
Thanks. So first, I would like to start with the point of universality you said. I think this is really a great point to start, and also because I would like to, I don't know if you probably know Slavoj Žižek, but he also once brought a really great example to the white people of Western Europe assuming the position of universality. And I like to see that in the example when they started, for example, taking studies on indigenous people in Latin America. So at first you had this position of universality from white Western Europeans, like, oh, look at them in the woods. They are here with the spirits, with nature. It's so beautiful. Yeah, they're so amazing. Completely degrading them in a certain way. On the other hand, you had researchers were coming and saying, hey, they're much more than just people living in the woods with the spirits. It's a society of people. They rape, they have aggression, they marry children to adults. So saying in the interesting thing, this disposition of white universality in a certain way, like, and humanizes people, I think. And we can also see this, I think, in left and right approaches to refugee crises, because like for the left, the refugees in many cases are simply people looking for help from whom no bad thing or aggression or traumatization can come, while the right is creating the picture of raping barbarians who come to steal away the women. Bringing me back to what you said about reality, and this is also something where psychoanalysis would love you and kiss you, I think, or also what also Lacan said is, the subject itself is always constituting its own reality. It is basically impossible in a way to have an objective view on reality, because every one of us is constituting that reality. And also, obviously, we have certain mechanisms in us that are trying to protect us. And this leads me to what you said about washing yourself, like the hands of oppression or stuff. I don't remember it exactly. It brings me back to Erich Fromm, who you probably know, who is like, I think one of his key messages is the importance of saying that the subject in itself fears freedom. We all love to talk about the idea of freedom, but real freedom is scary for the subject. And I can see this, especially in the project I'm doing also as well. It is a more comfortable position to approach, to be oppressed by the system and complain about it, but still go to work there every day, than actually changing everything because you are scared of the changes this might happen, because it would lead you in a certain way to more individuality. So the system is always, obviously, as you said, hegemonically trying to protect itself. So people prefer security to freedom. I think this is a huge balance problem. And this is leading me to the last point you said. I think for really changing things and not playing the game of the hegemony, you need to, you said it really beautifully, they're disrupting reality. Now, in my opinion, I think the only way to disrupt reality, and I can see this also how psychotherapy works in a way, how my work works, is by offending people. in the sense of that I have to come, and this is the question I want to ask you, would you agree to me, would you agree with me that the way to really inflict social change that could help the people to change their position and overcome their fear also of freedom is only possible by being able to offend people and to create a culture where we are not afraid of going into conflict, because by disrupting reality, this is the only chance where we can, like, it's really classic way of dialectics, you know, thesis, antithesis, and the new thing that arises from it. So would you agree that only by offending people and getting back to a culture of being able to offend us and talk with each other, we are able to inflict social change?
Well, thank you very much for your questions. Well, okay, now I feel that we are really off rail with this session now. Huh? The initial topic. No, that I'm glad that this is centered on us and not necessarily in the official topic. But okay, so yeah, thank you very much. Lots of insights that you brought. Yeah, about universalism. Universalism is one of the three components that are, I mean, according to Chantal Mouffe, that are hard-coded in liberal democracies or democracies. She says that is universalism. These are actually the liberal values that come from the Enlightenment. Okay, so we are talking from some stuff of civilizational formation, from the Western civilizational formation that come from 400, 500 years ago. Okay, since the times of colonialism. So universalism is one of them. Individual rights, together with individualism. Okay, and what was the other? Forgot about the other, but I'll come to that. She says that this is so hard-coded that we need another head to think about those, because we are so much immersed into it that we need another head. So this is really difficult to get. It is very difficult for an European to quit being Eurocentric. This is something that we need to have in mind, and even more difficult for an European institution. Okay, when you take the issue of Eurocentrism to an European institutions, there's already prepared argument. It's like it's bulletproof. They are able to never think about that, and this is something impressive. Fear of freedom. Yes, there is. I think you know. Sorry, there is this book that I don't find here again, but there is this book, The Wretched of the Earth, from Frantz Fanon. He is one of the pioneers in post-colonialist studies. He is a black Cameroonese, I think, and he is a psychiatrist. And in this book, he writes about enslaved people. And he writes, it's not necessarily the scientific method, but he writes with what he gathers from his patients. And his patients either were enslaved or were very close to cases of slavery. And I think it's very interesting. He was one of the first ones bringing this aspect of the slaves, the enslaved people that were not forcing themselves out of the situation that they were in, which I think is very much in line with the fear of freedom that you are talking. Paulo Freire also talks about that. He has an expression that is the tranquility of the oppressor. Okay, he divides the reality in two poles. the oppressor and the oppressed. The oppressor are the ones that exercise the line of the hegemony, and the oppressed are the ones that are being objects of that exercise. And the material transformation that he suggests is that the oppressed could look at the cave as they are, basically, and try to change their reality, which means breaking cycles of oppression. But many times the tranquility of the oppressor also resides in the fact, as you say, that the oppressed are strangely accommodated to a situation. They are, that's the phenomena that we call alienation. They are alienated in a certain form of oppression. But it is the freedom deserves a reason, because freedom is not easy. Freire says that in order to get freedom, many of the oppressed confuse freedom with the state of oppressing. So basically, they try to reproduce what the oppressing actors are doing. So instead of getting free, they become oppressors. So this happens a lot of time. You can see that, for example, in women that reproduce patriarchy, okay? Women that are like men. You can see that in Margaret Thatcher, for example. You can see that in many women that don't understand that they don't get free if they reproduce the violence that hurts them, okay? The other thing that makes the freedom difficult is that people, in order to get free, the oppressed need to set the oppressors free. And this is also not easy, because it involves lots of emotions, starting by that. How can I set free a guy that raped me, as the example that you give? No, I want him to suffer all his life. I want him to die. I hate him. Okay, but how can I set him free? Because if I don't set him free, I'm also not free. And this is this makes freedom something very very difficult. Well, at least according to Paul Freire. Now, the solution of offending people. I think this brings a very sensitive conversation, which is the conversation of violence. Violence. I'm not sure if I'm ready to have this conversation, but in briefly, I think it is important that we assume that violence has a definition that is currently controlled by an hegemony. Okay. Violence is, for example, what Russia is doing to Ukraine, but is not what United States were doing in Yemen. Violence is what, for example, an Arab activist is doing, as we call it, terrorism, but it's not the financial and institutional terrorism that the West is doing towards the South, the global South. There are many ways of deploying terror, and I'm not saying that terrorism is not that. What I'm saying is that what we call terrorism is limited and defined by certain actors that don't see themselves as terrorists. Okay, so I think that when we look to the matter of violence, we really need to understand, to look to the concept, to understand who is defining the concept. I feel terrorized every time the Portuguese finances send me a letter, okay? This for me is also a policy of fear, okay? I'm not saying that is the same that someone killed me with a bomb, but still I'm afraid of that. And it is promoted by an institution of something that is called a democracy. So there is the concept of violence. It's problematic because the actors defining it are limited. Okay, so if we need to offend people, I don't know, and I'm not sure if I see the output of your the proposal of methodology, but the thing is, as Frantz Fanon was saying almost 100 years ago, he had this metaphor that we need to kill the white man. Okay, and this is a very criticized metaphor, of course, because the white man doesn't want to be killed, literally. Yes, but the symbolic presence of the white man needs to be killed, and this is what Frantz Fanon was referring to the symbolic presence of the white man. Of course, when you want to kill the symbolic presence of a white man, sometimes you need to compete with a huge power. And how do you compete with a huge power? Because that huge power, even if symbolically, is exercising violence towards you, is the oppression. So how can you fight oppression? Sometimes you need to balance that power. That's what I'm saying. There is this book that is kind of forbidden outside of the post-colonial academy, okay? Kwame Ture talks about talks about that sometimes violence might be necessary to cause radical transformation. Now, how do you put that in a Western, or do you put that to a Western institution, or do you put that to a Western privileged social group? That would be very problematic. What is certain is that the Black Panthers in the United States, they are considered even today as kind of terrorists, but there is a difference coming from that. In the United States, there was a difference coming from that. And it is an unforgettable fight for the fight, anti-racist fight in the United States, historically in the world. So violence is a problematic word. It's a very complicated concept and might be necessary for certain processes of transformation. That's what I'm saying.
Hi, actually, I don't have a question. I may have an answer for your question. I hope so.
Thank you.
First, really, I was listening to your presentation and I was very, very interested. You were talking about a philosophy, a level which is practical and very, very realistic. And here, I may have an answer why you were excluded, since actually you have broken the system and the procedures and the common policy for a large, let's say, actors or a large foundations, like from my experience, like the World Bank, the EU, and other American agencies. You know, they have a system, all of them. I have worked with them. They have a system, they have simplifying the social change, simplifying the impact and how people will change, how norms will change. It's related to applications, proposals, and you know, this, etc. But you are touching a very important issue that social change is not easy. as it is reflected in the applications and the proposals. All of them are talking, actually, are talking on the projects that we are going well, we are changing the community, but till now, unfortunately, at least in the Middle East region, hundreds or thousands of projects were implemented. All of the donors were talking about achievement and impact and positive change, but unfortunately, the situation is going worse and worse. So this is my comment. It's not a question. Thank you. I will have the book and I will read it, since really I am very, very interested of what you were talking. It's a practical and realistic.
Thank you very much for your comment. I'm not sure if I have something to add. Read the book. Read Paulo Freire. He is a great and perhaps one of the most inspiring educators that ever existed. So go ahead with that. Thank you very much. I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, if you want to add, or someone else, because you had another thought that you wanted to add.
Just to go back, I just wanted to clarify one thing. I also think that the discussion about violence is extremely important, and we have to deconstruct violence in the other way, because I've also learned from my experience at the Children and Young Adult Psychiatry, where you have a lot of frequent violence in many levels, that violence also in a certain way represents a conflict that cannot be put into speaking, into question, into voice, which then leads to the violence itself. But what I meant by offending people, I did not mean in sense of acting out of physical violence, but offending in the sense of, and this is also what happens in psychotherapy, I challenge your reality. And I can only disrupt your reality by bringing in my reality and working with that and saying, okay, you feel that and that, but I feel that and that, and I see that and that. You know what I mean? So it's more about offending in the sense of offending us in challenging our worldview and our position. Like we are offended when we listen to a radical thinker, for example. You know what I mean? He says something like, this cannot be, and how can you say that? But. So I think that is more the point I was coming to, because I think that this is a huge problem that we also have inside the, whatever it may be, call themselves the left. You know what I mean? But I think that that this is something where we have to be able to do, and also to see that by offending and trying to disrupt reality, we don't die from the feelings that come up when we are offended. Our feelings don't kill you, and I think this is don't kill us. I think it's one of the most important lessons that we still need to learn. But I just wanted to clarify that. Also, I think the discussion about violence was really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. I think I did not understood you badly. Well, I just include what you say in my huge, wide concept of violence. I put symbolic violence also in the.
Yeah, it's also important.
Oh, I think nowadays most of the violence that we experience in the liberal democracies is from the symbolic dimension. We are pressured to be a certain gender, to have a certain sexual orientation, to have a certain professional performance, to have a certain social status, to have a certain education. There are many things that don't physically harm us, but symbolically dehumanize us. So for me, that's violence. And for me, it is important. Why it is important to put that in the package of violence? Because if I don't put that in the package of violence, I don't know what is hurting me. And whatever hurts me, whatever causes damage, I call it violence. Even today, I have nightmares, recursive nightmares with my educational processes in different stages. Why is that? Why education is creating me nightmares for so far? All in my life, I was having these nightmares. I think this is damaging. I think this is a form of violence, but yeah, clarification.
Honestly, I think it's beautifully put, and also to merge that again. The interesting thing in the context of when my team and me tried to change the system from within, and we had a lot of violence on a daily basis in many ways. The traumatizing thing of the experience was not the violence we had with the young adults, the fighting, The violence was after that, how the system told us that we were wrong, how the system in which position it was a symbolic change. The violence that was really traumatizing was the denial of one's reality, one's truth, and one's emotion. So I'm totally agreeing on that.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you.
All right. For my brain, there's a lot of things on the table now, because apparently not only is it difficult to measure, we first have to
we measured anything at all.
So it's back to square zero.
Sorry for that.
Thank you, Sergio.
Yeah. Thank you, you bastard. You've done nothing. Sorry for that.
Yeah, any other thoughts? Otherwise, I think I would close it here. Maybe, Sergio, you can stay online a little more in case someone wants to have a private question. Yes. But I feel like closing the plenary at this moment.
Thank you very much,
so in
everyone.
This case, Sergio, thank you for your talk. Right, yeah, coffee's ready. Yes, we meet in half an hour.
I would have one more, as I said in the beginning.
Yes.
I think people are going a little bit around now taking coffee, so maybe we'll wait a moment. No, it's fine.
I can hear you.
Yeah. You were talking about, I'm wondering a little bit how we can also bring that back to these people here working mostly in smaller scale projects, to be honest, no NGO level, freelancing even, working with young people, youth worker, maybe NGOs and things like that. So you were talking about different tools to use to actually, because I have a little bit the feeling that this measuring or analyzing from this perspective of the youth work field is also about recognition, no? Recognition to the outer world that this makes sense. And I think, I mean, honestly, very innerly from my heart, I believe in this, that it makes sense, because it's a different education. Call it radical, call it non-formal, whatever. No, it's exactly where we don't get the nightmares, hopefully. So how can we kind of combine that? Yeah, critically always ask ourselves that the tools the system gives us are probably just reproducing, yeah, but still showing the impact in order to grow and to get whatever, even more funding. I mean, even if this is also within the capitalist system, of course, but if we don't do, then we kind of delete ourselves, no? Then we cannot, I mean, it's a bit the change within, if possible. If I'm also not sure that you talked, for example, about the competence model for, or competence models for trainers, yeah? I have for trainers for youth work, and I have the feeling that it's also an attempt to show or to that there's a quality in what we do, yeah. So so how can we find a balance in that? And yeah.
Welcome to my world. I don't feel ready to answer that because I've not been practicing so much lately. Yeah. What I can tell is that I'm looking forward to experience something that can work for me. I was thinking this was also a possibility for there in Austria to make like an experimental session with which I would call it through radical education, with like a sound journey. So like telling a story. You remember in Amaranth this thing that happened with the cave? So something like that, but more elaborated and more deep, I would call it like that. And yeah, this could be, I mean, all the methodology that we use, I mean, as educators in what we call non-formal education, all this methodology, I think is right. What I think is wrong with non-formal education is the absence of radical education, of radical thinking. We are not, we are using the concepts, the goals that are prescribed by the ones that finance us, that are financing us, and we are not using anything that comes from beyond that. I think we got used to say that we do learner-centered processes. We got used to say that, but I'm not sure that we are doing that. I think we are doing institutional centering processes, and I think we need to be more radical in that. If we do this difference, I think it will be already something very different. Just you were talking about how to merge things, how to, okay, I need to keep doing this through these channels. How can I merge this with a more radical education? If you start bringing radical thinking into your sessions, I think I would say, without trying, because I didn't have that chance, but I would say that you'll get some results. You'll get some, at least some learning from that, some things that can move you forward. And that's it. For example, we are told that we need to work in the so-called European dimension. And yeah, we do this, you know, the intercultural evenings. We talk good stuff about Europe. We talk that is better to have an economic entity and no war.
We don't do that anymore, Sergio.
We cannot say that anymore. We cannot say that, yeah, because, you know, we are on a boat and the boat is sinking, and we are the part of the guys that are taking the water out of the boat, but the boat's still sinking. So the European dimension could be something that can be put in another level. Let's talk about European democracies. Let's talk about what are the problems of European democracies. You can say to the European Union that in the report you have discussed the European dimension of democracies, of the European democracies, and then in your session you question them, you problematize them, and then you try to find alternatives to whatever is happening now, whatever is established now, and that will be a radical approach. I would say this could be a radical approach. But you know, I lack practice. I really miss being on the field, working as an educator with young people.
I have a solution for that. You come and live with me.
Not now, because I got the bug, but maybe okay, at some point.
In 2 weeks from now is okay too.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that.
No, but what I also got is a small step, maybe too. Yeah, I mean, within your environment, you definitely try to include radical thinking, of course, but that we also challenge the ones who are part of the system, like the institutions, the funders, and all that. So in our reports, in our whatever, no, that's maybe.
I do think that institutions are not really being challenged. So it's too easy to, you know, forget about a comment from Sergio. You know, it is too easy to drop the comment. If there were more people challenging institutions add to a different approach. Of course, as Bell Hook says, every time you do that, you have risks. So my take on that is calculate your risks and calculate how you deal if it goes wrong. If you lose a job, because this is very, very, very realistic to happen. If you lose a job, what will you do?
Yeah, you're right.
So that's the real politic of being radical. I think we need to manage to anticipate what could go wrong and to have a response to that, and to be okay with that, and to be okay to lose our privilege, as Soraya was saying, because sooner or later you will not be established anymore as you were. You will not be having the same friends as you had. It will be more difficult in that regard. It's too easy to be nice. It's too easy to have many friends. Huh? That's very easy. That's too easy.
Good.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
a lot, Sergio. Again, it was also a good bridge from Amarante to a next level of thinking and how to bring it in practice also. Yeah.
Good. I'm just sorry that we didn't have Diana, because Diana was the person that would bring the practical matter for the methodology for research. I don't know much about that. Yeah, that's what I have.
Yeah, well, as I heard today, but I'm not mentioning any names. Well, the quantitative analysis is pointless.
No,
I'm just joking.
Yeah. The context. No, I think we could also, I mean, I think it's a very good opening starting point to also collaboratively think about what we already started 2 days ago, how we can now, what can we do with that, yeah? And we already tackled a little bit also, because I mean, we are not researchers, none of us, I think, no? So we also have limited tools and time, because that's not our main profession, in how to actually deal with, I don't know, get some hints of there is something happening as which we call a change, maybe, yeah? So, and you also gave some general ideas. I think I like the biographies or these interviews, or maybe let's see how we proceed from here. And if we can meet Diana, then maybe later.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Good.
Good.
I'm glad it was just. Thank you.
No, you're not on lights.
Sorry, it was the best that I could find.
Yeah. In this time of the year, you would never see them in a place. I mean,
Yes.
Well, now you.
Yeah, now we do. Thanks a lot.
I never saw it anyhow, so it's the same. Thank you.
All right, Sergio, as always, thank you for being available and for being so spontaneous. I think it's refreshing, and I also hope that you get well. I hope your COVID situation clarifies.
Yeah. This night was not so good. Was worse than the other one. I was seeing myself recovering recovering faster, but I feel okay. I now need a shower and maybe go lay down. That's what I will do.
All right, big hug, my friend.
My friend, thank you very much for the opportunity.
We'll see each other. All right.
Yes.
Take care, Sergio. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.